Hi, EHour students. Pleasure to have you back. Pleasure to be on another sunny Friday, at least it is here in Southeast Michigan with you. Um, wow, I'm excited. I'm excited because we have alum here today from from all across the country, frankly. We've got friends in Seattle joining us, friends in Texas joining us, and they've made their way across the coast as well. So you don't want to hear me. You're not hearing me yet, but you didn't pay your credits to come do this. So you want to hear from them, and let's get right to that. Let me jump over to share my screen and we can go through our announcements real quick. Okay, so first and foremost, wanted to give a heads up that we have a new co-host this week, Kristen Smith, who is joining us all the way from Seattle, Washington. She is a two-time Michigan engineering grad as well as a two-time MIT grad. She currently serves as the COO of an incredible company called Furnish. And if you haven't checked them out already, do so. It's pretty cool. They just raised a big round and she was kind of instrumental in making that happen. She's also an advisor to an incredible paint company called Claire that is really catching fire right now. Former alum of Amazon as well. And she is going to be joining us for the next few weeks to co-host our talks and sessions. So Kristen, thank you for sharing your time.
Thank you.
Yeah. And a couple of quick updates for you. The recordings of all of our prior class sessions are now posted in Canvas. So if you need to go on there and you want to rewatch a session and a conversation that we had, if you need to go and review it for the writing assignments and the journal assignments that are due, please go on there and you can find them all listed right in the announcements. The grades will also be posted. Your grades will also be posted at the beginning of each month. So we're tallying the attendance grades and then also the journal submission grades as we speak, and we will have those at the beginning of the month, so you'll have a sense of where you sit and kind of where you'll be going into the next sessions. Another announcement I want to give you a heads up on. A good peer of ours here in the U of M Entrepreneurship Network is Optimize. I suspect many of you have probably heard of them already. They're based out of LSA. And they have a social innovation challenge coming up. You can scan that QR code or go to their website to get more information on that application. But I would highly encourage you to do so. Optimize never ceases to impress me with their ability to put on innovative workshops and challenges. And it's an incredibly tight-knit community to be a part of. So don't hesitate to go check that out. And I'll share that also in the announcement in case you weren't able to grab it here, so you have it as well. Bloomscape, 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 Bloomscape. So big deal that we kind of hinted at and teased about maybe a week or two ago. We've got a competition that we are going to be announcing. I really wanted to announce it to you today, but if I'm being honest with you, which I always will, we still are sorting out just a couple of the wrinkles and a couple of the details. So we will end up doing that next week. However, coincidentally, maybe it's because they were excited to partner with U of M and they wanted to break this news at the same time. Here's a snapshot of an article from TechCrunch this week where it was announced that he just raised a $15 million Series B and also acquired another company. So pretty cool stuff. Excited to tell you more about that and excited to have Justin Mass joining us at the end of the semester. And it's actually Kristen, who is joining us today, who really was instrumental in making that happen. So if you appreciate this, know that she's the one primarily to thank. And Kristen, without any more needs to be said for me, please take it away.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to be here today, and I'm really excited about introducing our guest today, Nav Sooch. So Mr. Sooch co-founded Silicon Labs in August of 1996 and has served as the chairman of the board since its inception. He was also Chief Executive Officer or CEO through the end of fiscal 2003 and then interim CEO from April 2005 to September 2005. So a couple of rounds of being the CEO. Prior to founding Silicon Labs, Mr. Sooch held various leadership positions at Crystal Semiconductor, which was acquired by Cirrus Logic. They were a designer and manufacturer of integrated circuits, and some of his, or one of his roles included vice president of engineering. So very much on the technical side of things. Prior to that, Mr. Sooch was a design engineer with AT&T Bell Labs And then from October 2011, sort of in the middle of all of this, to April 2018, Mr. Sooch was also CEO of Ketra Inc., a private company in the field of solid state lighting. Mr. Sooch holds a BS in electrical engineering from University of Michigan Dearborn and an MS in electrical engineering from Stanford University. Currently, he also serves as a director for Sooch Foundation, which seeks to make a positive and permanent change in the lives of economically disadvantaged people in Austin through increased educational opportunities, for Uchi Restaurants, and for the mission-driven beverage company Clean Cause, and for the company AI Storm. Nav, we're so glad to have you here today. Thanks for spending the afternoon with us. And without further ado, I'd love for the students to hear from you.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Kristen. I'm really glad to be here. I wish we were doing this in person. I was really looking forward to a return trip to Ann Arbor, but we will do this online. I'll jump right into it. So as you mentioned, I got a BSEE degree from University of Michigan, Dearborn. During that time there, I had an internship with IBM in Burlington, Vermont. And the department I happened to be assigned to was doing semiconductors. And I kind of really fell in love with semiconductors. And I went to Stanford directly after Michigan to get a master's in electrical engineering there, again, specializing in analog mixed signal circuit design. You know, I loved engineering, and that's all I wanted to do, never considered business. Until one day I was at Stanford and I heard the term startup, and it just captivated my attention. The word just, the possibilities of starting something from scratch to being a significant business was just incredibly appealing. So if we'll go to the first slide that I have. So I didn't know anything about business, but I figured the best way to learn the startup world was to just go work for a startup. And that's what I did. The company was called Crystal Semiconductor, and it was Austin's first venture-funded startup back in 1985. Austin was a tiny little city back then. And I was employee number 20 at this company designing, I was gonna be design a chip, and it was a one-man project that I had. What was compelling about this company for me was that they were doing some industry first product developments. They were gonna go after analog mixed signal chips using standard CMOS digital processing technologies, which would lead effectively to more manufacturable, cheaper products. And they had some novel ideas of how to do analog to digital converters, and the target applications were digital audio. And this is back in the time when CD players were just being introduced. So let's go to the next slide and see how that all turned out. One more. So I call this, it was an epic fail. This company made every mistake in the book, and I'll go over some of those mistakes. The first was that we had really inexperienced engineers. I was one of those inexperienced people. To put somebody like me at the time in charge of a breakthrough product that had never been developed before was risky. And so, you know, the schedule was it was going to take 1 year to do product development. Well, it took 2.5 years. So that was, you know, we were backpedaling from day one with our lack of inexperience. The second and bigger mistake the company made was that we didn't do enough customer engagement while we were defining our products. Namely, a bunch of engineers sat around thinking, hey, wouldn't this be a cool product? And so it took 2.5 years to develop them, and then we learned that there weren't enough customers that wanted to buy it. And there's really nothing more painful than having worked your butt off on something and to realize that you missed the mark in the product definition and you just didn't have something that everybody else thought was as good as you thought it was. So the company needed multiple rounds of financing. We all got diluted as a result. And, so financially, it didn't turn out great for investors or employees. But what we did have was a team of really talented people, and we learned from our mistakes. And fortunately for us, that company got a chance to do a second wave of products that were better defined, that were more applicable to the target markets. Unfortunately, it was a little bit too late to actually realize on the success of that second wave of products. So the business got sold 7 years later to a company called Cirrus Logic, which is a public company. And Cirrus bought Crystal at just the right time because the business did take off after that. One of the main chips we were doing, the digital audio chips, turned out personal computers back then didn't have digital audio, and it was right after the acquisition by Cirrus that they all had digital audio. So the business just exploded. And today, what is Cirrus Logic is exactly what Crystal Semiconductor was. It's the offshoots of Crystal Semiconductor. And Cirrus is the leading supplier of digital audio chips for all smartphones. And it's a public company with a $4 billion market cap. Next slide, please. One more. So in 1996, I spent 4 years at Cirrus Logic after the acquisition, and I saw success firsthand. And at that point, I think my education on startups was complete. I'd seen failure, I'd seen success. But so then, the next logical thing for my career was to do my own startup. And the concept of leaving a VP of engineering job that paid well, I was considered one of the key employees at Cirrus Logic, so they gave me some good stock options, and I'd made some money. I had a nice nest egg at this time, and so to give that up while I had 3 kids, a mortgage, and to start Silicon Labs was, it was not a straightforward decision. And so I was wrestling with this, and the thought process I finally used to arrive at what to do was I basically looked at the worst case scenario. I said, okay, what's the worst that could happen if I do Silicon Labs? And what's the worst that could happen if I don't start Silicon Labs? So starting Silicon Labs and having it fail was a pretty simple thing to figure out and say, okay, well, I'd have to go back and get another job, and chances are I'd go back probably to Cirrus Logic or something similar. And I was good in my field, and so that risk didn't sound that significant to me. That I'd go back to doing what I was doing. That's not that big a risk. On the other hand, if I didn't start the company, I would be beating myself up on not having the guts to take a risk, probably for the rest of my life. And that's something I couldn't live with. So we made the decision to start Silicon Labs. I had 2 amazing co-founders that I had met at the previous company. We'd worked together for 10 plus years, knew each other and trusted each other really well. So next slide, please. So what did we do at Silicon Labs? We spent 6 months developing a business plan. That was the time when we had no salaries, so we were living off of our savings. But at the end of that business plan, we raised $5 million from Austin Ventures in 1997. And the company really didn't miss a beat after that. We developed products very quickly. We picked markets that could accept and ramp those products quickly. We became profitable 7 quarters from when we got that first financing. And then we actually IPO'd exactly 3 years after that first financing, and we had a market cap of $3 billion on the NASDAQ on day one. It was pretty heady times. The products that we did were, we did chips for dial-up modems. That's when the internet was exploding back in the mid to late 90s. We knew darn well that dial-up modems was a temporary solution, as cable modems were around the corner. But it was definitely the only game in town at the time, and we could do something that was substantially smaller, less expensive, lower power, easier to use. And so we gained 80% of the market for dial-up modems. We also did analog chips, RF chips for the emerging cell phone market at the time. And that proved to be a really great decision as cell phones exploded. One of our first customers was Samsung. Samsung was like number 30th in the cell phone space when we got designed in, and they were number 1 3 or 4 years later. So we were able to ride that. Today, Silicon Labs is a leading supplier of wireless chips for the Internet of Things. We have about 900 million in revenue and 1,700 employees worldwide. So it's a thriving company today. Still trades on the NASDAQ. Next slide, please. Last slide is so I have some thought about what's my advice for startup success. The biggest advice I have is pursue ideas with a certain lens, with a lens that says, can this idea lead to generating early revenues for whatever product or service I'm offering? A lot of people confuse early revenues with being paid to do development work. That's not a product revenue, and I would run away from those types of ideas, but look for ideas that can generate revenues fast. Look for ideas that a small development team can do. If you're in a B2B space, look for more than one customer. One customer is pretty risky. They can change their mind at a moment's notice, and you can be screwed. So make sure you have multiple customers. Minimize the required investment. If you do these things, you will maximize the probability that you'll be in the control of your own destiny. You should partner with some trusted co-founders. It's a lot easier when you can have people that are a good sounding board, and hire some top talent. That's my advice. All right, Eric.
Thanks, Nav. That was great. I really appreciate it. If we were in Ann Arbor right now, we'd be getting a huge sound, a round of applause, and students getting all excited to hear more about that. But that's really phenomenal. I appreciate that education. I'm just going to bring Kristen's video back up here as well so she can join us. Perfect. There you are.
There I am.
That's awesome. So, I mean, a million different areas that I feel like we could dive into first on that. But one of the things that, of course, we have to play to our crowd here, and we have to know, when you were at Michigan, what do you feel like it was that was something that you learned or an experience that you had that you still carried forward, or what was it, a shaping piece of the education?
There's a lot of smart people at Michigan. And so I was fortunate that I did really well in school. And that confidence that you could compete with the best and come out on top is something that has stayed with me. And I think if you don't believe in yourself, it's hard to succeed. So I think it's at Michigan where I started developing that belief in myself.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great it's easy to get caught up when you're a student there and not have that perspective because you feel all the the challenge and the stress of that all. So that's fantastic. So I want to go back to you co-founded Silicon Labs with friends,
Yes.
as you described, and you talked about how important it is to have great co-founders. So would you found another company with friends? What were the pros and cons of doing so?
Absolutely, I would do it again. I think you have to have a clear leader. And that was one of our first decisions was who's going to lead this company. And I wanted to, but I waited for the other two to basically say, yeah, hey, we want you to do it. I was really the only logical choice. But, it's having friends that will give you the unvarnished truth is something that's so incredibly valuable. And with these two, I had worked with them for so long that we all knew each other's strengths and weaknesses. So there weren't going to be surprises along the way. But, we knew that when times got tough, we would all have each other's back. And that's something that it's hard to replace. It's hard to have that level of trust with a new person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. I would have to think that level of trust becomes critical to maintaining balance in your life too, and maintaining perspective with those who you're working with, and the ability to have them also kind of help you gain insight when things might be less balanced than would be ideal. And you certainly don't seem like you're ever not having your hands in different places. I mean, between Silicon Labs and the work you've done there, and then the foundation and the boards you're on, and I recently read about your engagement with some of the mass transit work in the Austin area. How do you think about the ability to balance focus and your time and attention, and how do you prioritize the diverse things that you get into?
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. So, I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I like to get my hands into things that I don't know. It's one of the privileges of having had success. People, you have money, so a lot of people approach you for money. But you get exposed to a lot of different ideas, and I'll get involved in things if I have a pretty simple criteria. Can this idea be big, and will I learn something in the process, and will it make me smarter? And if I can get those two things, I'll get involved. And that has worked really well for me because, if I'd stayed in my lane of semiconductors, I don't think my life would be as rich, and so I love the diversity that I have.
That
super speaks to me as well. Though I probably don't do as good of a job of prioritizing what I get into, because I can just get curious about everything. Sounds like you're similar.
Yeah, it's similar for me.
Yeah. So there's a really good student question I want to bring in the field of IoT. Is there a particular innovation idea or next big thing that you would place your bets on?
Whoa.
And the company stock ticking note that we should go after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there are just, I can speak to what I know, which is a variety of wireless standards that serve the Internet of Things, particularly in low power. So that's Bluetooth, Zigbee, proprietary RF techniques that companies use. There's an emerging low power Wi-Fi standard that is intended for battery operation. And lastly, a cellular standard for battery powered long life IoT devices. I think that all of these are going to coexist, and you're going to find multiple end node devices that have all of these various standards on them. And I think it's the company that can make these products easy to use for a variety, for as wide an application set as possible, is a company that's going to come out on top. And that's what Silicon Labs is focused on, is ease of use. We're, as big as the home automation is today, we haven't seen anything yet. And it's largely because devices are still a little too hard to use and deploy. It's just not as painless as it should be.
Sure.
But that's coming.
Okay, good to know. We can transition just for a quick second and kind of focus a little bit on where you prioritized and kind of made home and life and community blend together there in Austin. You mentioned what a small town it actually was when you first kind of came on the scene, and I don't think anyone would call it a small or unknown town now, at least. Yeah. So many of our students maybe haven't been, or maybe have never visited. What's a little known benefit of being in the Austin area that everyone should know about? And then conversely, what's a myth that everyone has wrong, or a total misnomer?
So Austin is green. It's a beautiful city. It's hilly. It's not flat, dry Texas desert that you might think of. We call ourselves the live music capital of the world. So it's has a diverse nightlife. It's an international city now. It has people from all over the world that have come. In 1985, when I got there, people were telling me that I'd missed the fun Austin, that the cool small town, college town Austin was over. But Austin has doubled in size every 20 years since its inception in 1840. So it will continue to double. I think now it's such a tech focused, diverse place. It's a consumer products, CPG goods, a lot of startups in that space there. So it's a thriving environment. Tesla's moving a factory there. That's just going to continue the growth of the city.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was there not quite at a doubling point from when you got there. I moved from Ann Arbor to Austin in 1998, 99. And it was definitely one of those surprising cities that in Ann Arbor, we just really didn't know too much about it. But it was even different from when you first got there, when I got there, and it is way different now. It's just growing and growing. So if you haven't been to Austin, I highly recommend it. It is everything that he said. It's international city. It's great culture, great music. So many
great food.
No snow. We'll just leave it there. No snow. That works. Looks like we've got student questions coming in like crazy, so we'll keep trying.
Yeah, so I want to there's a couple of student questions that are kind of related. So one was about the most important soft skill that's helped you in success, and one might be related if you say that, the soft skills are a little bit less innate for engineers, but the other one was, what skills do you think engineers lack that are crucial for being a leader or CEO of a company? So soft skills and leadership skills. What are those?
Okay, so I think this may not sound soft, but one of my skills is the ability to critique the issue without critiquing the person, or without it appearing like I'm critiquing the person. So I had a culture, still do, the company still has a culture of tackling issues head on, not sugarcoating the severity of problems, without making it sound like it was somebody's fault. And I think that's I don't know, I never worked on that skill. It just seemed to be, and people always just appreciated that I would never make things personal. that it was always, and people would walk away feeling pretty good about themselves. And I'd say the other skill is to not ever shoot the messenger. Don't, you know, I think CEOs that overreact to bad news really are they're fostering a culture without knowing it, and that culture is going to be, don't ever tell the CEO bad news, and information is what you need as a leader, accurate information. So you really got to be calm if you want to be successful, in my opinion. What was the follow-on question?
It was, what skills do you think engineers lack that are crucial for being a leader? I think it'd be the same, but
yeah. So those apply.
Okay.
yeah.
So kind of branching off of that, a different student question came up, and that was, what are the best ways to learn how to effectively found and operate a startup? So I guess maybe we can boil that down to say, to the students who are coming out of Michigan in the next few years, if you were in their shoes, knowing what you know now, what would you advise that they do for the first couple of years of their career if they want to know how to run a startup well?
I would go work for a startup. I think if you go work for a startup that is small enough, that is preferably in the space that you're interested in, that's probably one of the best education things you can do. And when you're checking out the startup, try to find out about the environment, the culture. The more open they are, the more willing they are to share exactly what their business plans are. That's where you're going to learn the most. And not every startup has that kind of openness mentality. There's people that tend to keep things to themselves, leadership in particular. And so, you know, if you, in your interview, if you ask a question that somebody says, oh, we're not told about that, run from that company. That's not your company. And it happens all the time.
Yeah. All right, so here's another location question from the audience. Do you feel at all pressured by technology and startups, so primarily being located in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, California? How do you think about that in Austin?
Well, look, you can't deny the number of great startup opportunities that are in the Bay Area. But there's a negative that comes with that environment. So when I used to go to the Bay Area, when I was running Silicon Labs, I'd go meet with people and my head would spin. Like they would tell me about 5 other companies that were doing something similar or that I needed to be paying attention to. And I you know, my blood pressure would rise, and I'd come home to Austin and I'd start working back on what we, you know, thought our priorities were. And what I started to realize is there's a lot of wasted energy in Silicon Valley sometimes. People are constantly looking over their shoulder. Your employee retention isn't nearly as high as it is in places like Austin. And so we were making progress while there was a lot of hand wringing going on in Silicon Valley. So there are some advantages to not being there. And I think that's one of them, that you can keep your employees focused on the task at hand. And I think you need to go to a place that has a critical mass of talent. If you don't have that, I think you're really hindering yourself. So you got to match up your idea with the place and the type of talent you're going to need for that idea with the place that you're going to choose to run the company.
That's phenomenal. I have another student question here, and then I'm going to tack on a question on it afterward. The student question was, how did you work through not having an income for the first 7 years of your startup? Simple as that.
No, so I don't think, if I said that, I didn't mean to say that.
Oh,
So
okay.
the first 7 years of Crystal Semiconductor, I was being paid like an engineer. So there was a salary. The only time I didn't have a salary is when I started Silicon Labs. And there was a 6-month period where we were paying ourselves from our savings. And so that, and you know, that was part of the risk calculation of starting that company is, hey, you know, I'm going to have to go without a salary. And at that point, I had had a nest egg because I'd worked for 11 years. I'd made some money in the sale of Crystal Semiconductor to Cirrus, and then the subsequent 4 years at Cirrus Logic, I was VP of engineering, and I'd gotten some good stock options, and I made some money. But no, there was only a 6-month period that I didn't get a salary.
Got it. And so the follow-up question I was kind of intrigued by with that is, again, I kind of read about the engagement you've had with the mass transit plan. You've got your foundation. You've been seemingly an active member of the Austin community as a whole. I'm interested in your perspective. Michigan is known for producing kind of well-rounded, civic-minded leaders and humble individuals at that. Talk to us a little bit about your perspective of what it means now for tech CEOs and for tech industry leaders. Is there a responsibility, and I don't want to say an obligation, to be engaged in the community and to try to advance progressive notions to help society as a whole, or how do you view that?
I think so. I think if you're in a privileged position of leadership, you have an influence on society, and you should exercise that influence for the good of the community. So I think, particularly the more successful the company becomes, the more of a responsibility it should take on to better the community. And you know, that was something that we felt strongly about from day one, even though we didn't have time to work on it. when you know, as a startup, like basically the excuse we told ourselves was, let's get successful and then we'll take care of some of this stuff. So like, you know, we made an early on philosophy that we were going to donate 1% of our profits to our local community. We've been doing that for 20 years now. But, you know, it's sort of like, you know, as a startup, you should focus on your business. You got to get to success. You got to get to self-sustainability. But as soon as you can get to sustainability, you should help the community. You should get involved.
Sure. That's great.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, a couple more student questions. There were a couple around, like, what allowed Silicon Labs to be more successful than like Crystal Semiconductors, where you were and you saw it from the inside, or from other competitors that are out there?
So I think talent is probably the biggest reason for our success. The talent that Crystal Semiconductor had 11 years earlier, it might have been the same individuals, but we were so green. We didn't have the years of learning that Silicon Labs had. So we really, the reason Silicon Labs is successful is there is a shortage of highly qualified mixed signal design engineers in the world. We had an unfair share of those people. We knew them personally. My two co-founders are both MIT grads. They're two of the smartest people in the business ever. And what you learn with hiring is that A people want to work for A people or work with A people. And so if you have superior talent, you'll continue to have superior talent. And that was the main reason for our success.
That's perfect. Another student question here. So In the role that you're in now as chairman of a company that's as large as it is, what do your days look like?
Oh, it's pretty nice. I we have an amazing management team. I do not have to worry about the business, think about the business, or interact with them. So my interactions with Silicon Labs are probably, uh, 20 days a year. It's there's more phone calls involved, but it's not a big time commitment. And what you learn about strategy is if you have a good strategy, you don't need to keep refining it every 5 minutes.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Awesome. There's a lot of questions, and I get this question too about, when do I join a startup? If I'm curious about this, do I go straight after I graduate, or do I get industry experience first? Do you join a startup when it's like just starting, when it's 1 to 2 years old, when it's more established, like a few years on? Like,
Yeah.
advice wise, where in your career do you think it makes sense? Like, what check boxes would you want to have if you were giving yourself advice? And then, what kind of startup do you think fits with different folks in terms of how mature it is and what stage you're joining?
So I think the answer is different for different types of skills. So if you're hardware oriented, or circuit design, like super technical, you're gonna need more, like unless you got a PhD, chances are you haven't learned enough technical stuff in college, and you need to go practice it a little bit more. And it's generally the larger company that's going to kind of give you that experience base. If, on the other hand, you're a creative person and you've got a product idea for a new beverage, let's say, you don't need a whole lot of experience to develop that product. The product development in itself is pretty straightforward. It's more of a marketing and sales skill set that you need. And so you can learn that marketing and skill set from other companies that are succeeding to some level. Like I wouldn't join a plain old startup, but you don't want to, like, let's say you're going to go in the beverage space. Well, working at Coca-Cola probably is going to be helpful, but not nearly as helpful as a brand that's, got 5 or 10 million in sales and is trying to get to 20 or 30. Like, that's going to be much more relevant for you if you want to launch your own beverage brand. So I think you got to adjust based on what type of business you're thinking of.
That's helpful. Another student question. You talked about the idea of starting the company with your friends and trusted individuals and how much you would recommend that. And the question was from students, how would you suggest they go about building their network of such highly qualified and trusted individuals? Any pro tips on that?
Well, I mean, it's usually going to be coworkers that you should know who the best students are at Michigan. You should become friends with them. You should, because that's talent. That's like some of the best talent in the country, and you should stay in touch with them. Like you should be talking business ideas. I'm sure you guys are, but it's your network. It's easiest with coworkers. It's easiest with students that you interact with daily. But and that's what I think. Anything else, friends could introduce you, or you might meet somebody at a networking event, which I would do, but you're just not going to get that quality interaction over time that's going to flush out
Mm,
whether you really trust somebody or not.
totally.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, since we are almost out of time, let's end with this one. Quick sense of what's next for you. What do you see on the horizon for Nav?
Uh, more investments in startups. I don't see myself running a company again. I've had my share of that. So it's investing in more ideas and maybe some philanthropic ideas, so.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Well, from one Dearborn grad to another, thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Kristen, thank you so much for joining us and co-hosting today, coming back to Michigan for doing that. And yeah, thank you so much for the education. Students, you get a week off again, and we'll see you next Friday. If you need anything, you know where to reach us. But in the meantime, stay safe and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.